Hello and welcome. I'm Imran Garda, sitting in for Riz Khan. The world is watching as events unfold in Egypt, and perhaps most concerned about the outcome is Israel, whose strategic alliance with Cairo spans more than 30 years. Well, in September 1978, overseen by US President Jimmy Carter, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin signed the historic Camp David Accords. 1 year later, Sadat and Begin signed a peace treaty between their two countries. The treaty meant that Egypt was officially the first Arab country to recognize Israel. In 2007, after Israel's blockade of Gaza, in an attempt to remove Hamas from power, Egypt followed suit and closed the Rafah border crossing, imposing severe economic restrictions on the Strip. Well, now Israel is contending with a new Middle East where Arab citizens are fighting for the right to choose their own leaders who may not serve Israel's best interests. Well, today we ask, does Israel want a democratic Middle East? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions, your comments, and you can also send an SMS or email. Plus, we welcome your phone calls onto the show. Well, joining us now on the show from Jerusalem is Gil Hoffman. He's the chief political correspondent and analyst for the Jerusalem Post. In Tel Aviv, we're joined by Meir Javed Anfar, an Iranian-Israeli Middle East analyst who specializes in the analysis of Iranian political and intelligence affairs. And we hope to have Rami Khouri join us as well in a few minutes' time. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Gil Hoffman, if I could start with you. Israel says it's the only democracy in the Middle East, so it should surely be supporting the prospect of a second.
There's no doubt about that. Netanyahu yesterday gave a speech to the European Friends of Israel, to parliament members from around Europe, and he said he does want to see Egypt become democratic. We in Israel want the Egyptians to have the same rights that Jewish, Christian, and Muslim Israelis have here in Israel, but he has reason for concern. He has reason that there are groups that will take advantage of the nascent democracy in Egypt and use it to promote ideals that are not democratic at all. He said that he doesn't want this election to be the last election that there would be in Egypt. And so there can be democracy, just the world needs to handle it smartly, needs to handle it in a slow but steady kind of way to ensure its success.
Okay, let's listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu actually had to say. Let's get a substantial chunk of that speech. Let's listen in.
What could develop and what has developed already in several countries, including Iran itself, repressive regimes of radical Islam, which certainly repress human rights and totally crush them, don't permit any democracy, any freedom, any rights. They also pose a terrible threat to peace and stability to the interest of all civilized people. That is the fear of all of us, my fear, and I think that is the fear that unites many others.
Well, Gil, looking at those fears, as Netanyahu says, this might create a regime that will crush human rights and not allow freedom. Surely we've got to realize that there was one of those regimes. There was one exactly like that for 30 years. Yet Netanyahu and his predecessors never seemed to have a problem with it.
Look, it's not up to Israel to decide who the leadership of Egypt is going to be or any other country in the region. Israel needs all the friends it can get in the region. It used to have a much better friendship with Turkey. The prime minister himself has issues with the king of Jordan, and because of that, Mubarak played a role that was so central. He was the one honest broker in the region that could talk to the Israelis and to the Palestinians and bring them together. And not having him there is going to make everything a lot harder when it comes to peacemaking. It's up to the Egyptian people to decide who their leader is going to be, and whoever it's going to be, Israel will want to talk to them, will want to continue the peace agreement that there is, and the hope is that whoever the Egyptians choose will want to as well.
Okay, glad to inform you that Rami Khouri has now joined us, the editor-at-large of Beirut's The Daily Star and the director of the Issam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. He joins us from New Hampshire here in the US. Rami Khouri, thanks a lot for joining us. You would have heard what Gil Hoffman had to say there. It seems as if we're being presented with a false dichotomy here. Either there's this scary, frightening Islamic Armageddon type of government, or a friendly, stable dictator.
Well, I think this is the sort of standard kind of Zionist ideological nonsense that we've been hearing for many years, which is parroted in the United States, unfortunately. You know, the Israelis say they can't tell the Egyptians who their government is, but they're saying, well, they can't tell them who it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be Islamic Brotherhood involved in a pluralistic coalition of some sort. This is really unacceptable. It's just hypocritical, double standards. It has no credibility, and it should have no place in a civilized world. The Israelis certainly should have legitimate concerns if they see radical movements taking over in countries around the region that are hostile to Israel. Of course, they're going to be concerned. But the fact is that the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and the progressive groups and the liberals and the Democrats and the others and the army and everybody in between, the businessmen, are going to form a coalition government of some sorts. And the best thing that Israel can do to make sure that its neighbors are friendly is that it should stop being aggressive against the Palestinians and stop occupying and colonizing and settling Arab land and starving the people in Gaza. I mean, this is really a two-way process. Israeli actions breed Arab reactions. Arab reactions breed Israeli reactions. So I think we have to give the Islamist movements that are playing by the democratic rules a chance to show what they can do. There will be minority partners. They will be overwhelmed by the civil society and the civilian groups and the other groups in the country. And you will probably, at best, hopefully have a situation as we've had in Turkey in recent years. The Israelis should just relax and stop telling us that our rights are dependent on their security first and foremost. That Israeli security and Arab freedom have to happen together and not sequentially starting with Israeli security. This is racism, and we've had enough of it.
Mayor Javid Anfar in Tel Aviv, that's quite a compelling argument from Rami Khouri, is it not?
Well, again, I have to say that, you know, you can't pick and choose democracy. Democracy is not a buffet lunch where you say you can have, you know, we'll give you everything, you know, you have a choice of everything as long as it suits our interest. I think every country has a right to choose its leaders and the parties. We can see that, in fact, the Israeli government is very enthusiastic about the prospect of democracy in Iran, because from what it can see, any other party apart from those in power today would be far less hostile to the state of Israel. So it's up to every country, every people to choose who they wish. Israel has legitimate concerns. I don't see it as racism here, as Rami Khouri says. I see it as a concern. We have the Islamic Brotherhood, if they come to power. For now, that doesn't even look like it. For now, majority of people in Tahrir Square are there because of the Twitter and Facebook, not because of the message from the mosque. And I don't see the Islamic Brotherhood being there. But you know, the concern is there, and Israel has a right to just express that concern. Israel is not going to change the government in Egypt, nor does it want to. It's just a lingering concern in Israel, which I think is very, very valid.
But okay, Mayor, forget about the Muslim Brotherhood for a moment. There's lobbying here in the United States, even against Mohamed ElBaradei, who's seen as one of the most moderate and secular leaders in the opposition movement, if you like. Malcolm I. Honline from the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations said that as head of the IAEA, ElBaradei covered up Iran's nuclear weapons capability in his reports, that he is a stooge of Iran. He fronted for them, he distorted the reports. I mean, this is devoid of facts, and it's one of the great smears around at the moment. It does seem to highlight the desperation from some quarters not to see Egyptian democracy at work, doesn't it, Mayor?
Imran, I wouldn't call Mr. ElBaradei a stooge of Iran, nor would I believe that he would serve Israel's interests to go around lobbying in terms of who should be in power in Egypt. This does not serve the strategic interest of Israel. However, I have to say that the concern regarding Mr. ElBaradei stems from the fact, and I have to emphasize the word fact here, in that during his tenure, the IAEA inspectors found designs for nuclear warheads in Iran, testing of nuclear warheads, and they hid it. And they didn't reveal it till it was revealed later on by The Guardian. So that's what has colored the reputation of Mr. ElBaradei. I don't think he's a stooge of Iran. However, that incident, which many people believe it's a very serious incident, has damaged his credibility as somebody who is going to be a balanced politician.
Okay,
however, at the end of the
would
day,
be interesting to hear what the IAEA has to say.
I think
would be interesting to hear what the IAEA has to say about that.
Sure.
I'm going to stop you there for a moment because I want to go to our inbox and get to one of the emails that we have here. This one's from Sarah Apps in London, who says, leaders should need the support of their people, not their patrons, to gain and stay in office. If they are democratic and free elections, then Egyptians, not Americans, not Israelis, will help shape their policies towards Israel. Let's hope that comes about. Let's ask Rami Khouri what he thinks about the email from Sarah.
Well, I think the issue of legitimacy of governments is very important. And if the Egyptians can make a transformation, and the Tunisians and others to follow in the Arab world, to have democratic, accountable, pluralistic, rule of law-based government, this will be in the interest of the Arabs, of the Israelis, of the Iranians, the Turks, the Americans, the Europeans. Everybody will benefit. This is a win-win scenario to have democratic governments. The Israelis have genuine concerns, but those concerns are primarily a product of their own militaristic extremism over the last 30, 40 years, what they've continued to do in Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan. And the Israelis have to calm down a little bit and examine their own policies, as well as understand that the majority of Arabs, certainly the Jordanians and the Egyptians who have peace treaties, are willing to have a peace with Israel. They're happy to have a peace with Israel, but they're not happy to have Israel starve the Gazans and colonize Jerusalem and the West Bank and the Golan. So there has to be movement on both sides to get a situation where the Arabs and the Israelis can live in security and equal rights. But legitimate government, democratic government, is definitely something that is in the interest of everybody. And I am surprised that the Israelis are pushing so hard already to come up with ideas about, well, Iran or the Muslim Brothers, and we should be careful about what happens. The Israelis should be at the forefront of pushing for more democratization in this region, because Democrats understand each other.
Let's take a caller now, Riyadh from the UK. Riyadh, go ahead.
Yes, it's primarily, I don't really believe there is any democracy neither in the Zionist entity nor in the Arab world. Because if you define democracy as having parliament or having satellite or having mobile telephone, the whole country or the whole of these countries have. But do they have a human right or a freedom? The answer is no. So what you have in Israel, in the Zionist entity, is a military dictatorship. You look at their history, from inception up to now, every single rulers who came into power, they are ex-generals. But they have the pretext. They have for the front of parliament, of election. You have the same thing in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Iraq, in the whole Arab world. Okay. They have the same facilities.
Okay. Okay, Riyadh, I'm going to pose that to Gil Hoffman. Thanks a lot for your call, Gil. Riyadh from the UK basically saying even Israel's democracy is under question. He calls it a military dictatorship.
Netanyahu has never been a general. His predecessor, Ehud Olmert, who offered the Palestinians 100% of the West Bank, was not a general. We have 13 members of Knesset that are not Jewish. The Arabs enjoy democracy here in Israel that the Egyptians wish they had, and throughout the Arab world wish they had. And you know what? What's really important to say here is this has nothing to do with Israel, that no one who came to Tahrir Square cares about what's going on in Israel or with the Palestinians. They're there to demand their own freedom. The gentleman that set himself on fire in Tunisia demanding change in his country didn't care about the Palestinians. What has happened over the last few weeks has really shown the world that it was a fallacy, that the Arab world had to wait to achieve their freedom until there would be an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. The world was saying that for so long, and meanwhile they were letting
hold on a second. Hold on a second. I think you're diverting us for a second, because the question over Israel's democracy is a valid one, is it not? I mean, looking at your democracy, you mentioned peace overtures, as you claim, from Ehud Olmert, but Israel has democratically elected a government who continues an occupation which is into its 44th year. You've democratically elected a foreign minister, Avigdor Lieberman, who actually lives in a settlement, Nokdim, which is in a Jewish settlement in the occupied West Bank. The same foreign minister calls for the drowning of Palestinian prisoners, the execution of Arab-Israeli Knesset members. So, I mean, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood have never had the opportunity to be in power, so we can't judge their democratic credentials, even if they do win, but we can rightfully judge yours, can't we? Who's the bigger threat to the region?
You know, no media around the world is more anti the Israeli government than the current Israeli media. They are very critical of this government, but it was elected by the people, and Netanyahu has made overtures to the Palestinian leadership from the first day in office. He's frozen construction in the West Bank in a way that Hillary Clinton called unprecedented. Avigdor Lieberman said he would give up his own home. He would have his own community be evacuated for a peace agreement with the Palestinians. And they haven't been willing to come to the table for their own reasons. And what's going to be going on in Egypt now may make the Palestinians even more recalcitrant, because they'll say, look, Obama abandoned his support for Mubarak. Maybe he's going to abandon his support for Israel as well. And that's something that Israelis are concerned about. Israel is a thriving democracy that's gone on for 62 years, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And the very fact that we have members of parliament who criticize the foreign minister, that doesn't happen most places in the Arab world.
Let's go to Rami Khouri. Rami Khouri, there seems to be an additional fear here that Gil brought up, the fact that the Israelis feel that Obama might abandon them. But as far as I remember, that $3 billion or so US dollars per year seems still to be flowing to Israel.
Right. I think the Israelis clearly and I think rightly are really worried about being isolated and being subjected to what they call a campaign of international delegitimization. Israelis feel this, and we can hear it in the other two guests' comments, but I think this is mostly the result of their own policies. The Israelis have to understand that people judge them by their actions, by their behavior, what they actually do on the ground, what they did with the Goldstone report, what they did with the General Assembly resolutions and Security Council resolutions about the Golan, about not Judaizing, occupying Jerusalem, about so many issues. Israel has been criticized and condemned more by the Security Council than anybody in the world. So we judge the Israelis by what they do. And they are concerned about the future. They look around, they see Hezbollah is strong in Lebanon, they see Hamas in Gaza, they see Islamic groups doing well all around the region. They should be worried, because a lot of these groups are growing partly because of what they criticize about Israeli behavior. But when the Israelis behave decently and normally and in a law-abiding way, the Arabs are perfectly willing to make peace with them and coexist and trade and have normal relations, as the Jordanian and Egyptian peace treaties that have held prove. So I think the Israelis should really wake up and just re-examine what they're doing and look again at the opportunity to engage with the Arab world, to negotiate a reasonable peace that is fair to both sides, to the Jewish dominant state, Israeli state, and to the Jewish majority, and to the Palestinians. So this is a huge opportunity for the Israelis, and I urge them to leave the propaganda and just get on with the business of making peace according to law.
Okay, let's go to Mir Javidan. For Mir, both the Israelis and the Iranians, interestingly, and you wrote about this as well, seem to be drawing comparisons between what's happening in Egypt and in the region in general to Iran 1979, one fearing it and the other championing it. Isn't that maybe a bit of a false comparison? Isn't this closer to Berlin 1989?
Well, if it would be close to Berlin 1989 if the whole of the Arab world was about to change. And if that starts to happen, and if we see dictatorships falling all around the Arab world, I think then Berlin would be a better an example. But for now, the Iranian government is very worried that people in Iran are going to look at people in Egypt, and that the fact that they're coming out in the streets asking for their freedom, and they may want to do that again, just as they did after June 2009. So they're, in order to deflect that comparison, they're trying to say, no, what the people of Egypt want is what we are here for, what we had a revolution for in 1979, and not the demonstrations, not because of the demonstrations last year. And the Israeli government is saying that, well, they have a concern because Ayatollah Khomeini, and I'm also Iranian as well as being Israeli. My family lived in Iran during the revolution and 8 years after. We remember that Ayatollah Khomeini promised democracy, and in fact in Iran there was democracy for about 18 months after the revolution, but he suddenly stopped it and he started going after all the parties, and democracy finished. So I think that's another reason why the Israeli government is worried that this is going to turn into another Iran. But one point I have to add, and I have to agree with Rami here, Israel needs to strategic realignment in this region. We have lost an ally, we need realignment, and the best way, and in terms of effectiveness, the most powerful way is to restart negotiations with the PLO, stop building settlements in the occupied territories against the wishes of everybody, including our own friends in the United States, because this is only self-damaging and it isolates us.
Okay, fair point. Quite a few fair points there. Indeed, let's take another phone call from Brent in D.C. Brent, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you. And I'm a columnist for the Hill newspaper here in Washington. The advice that I have offered people in the U.S. high up in the government, which hasn't been taken yet, is what we should have in Cairo right now is an interim government with 3 people, one of whom in the power structure should be ElBaradei, or a clear voice for the political opposition with credibility with the political opposition. In terms of the Palestinians and the Israelis, number 2, I do think that whatever emerges in Cairo will probably be something that will more or less keep the agreement with Israel. But more than that, I would love, since we're all giving advice, for my friends in Israel, and I consider them friends, to appoint a unity government that involves all the major political parties in Israel and make an offer to the Palestinians to fully test the capabilities of an agreement, which will ultimately look like it looked at the end of the 1990s. I think everyone knows that follows this, more or less 90% of how it plays out. It's going to look like where it was at the end of the 90s with Clinton, Barack, and Arafat. Let's try to make the deal and cut out the inflammatory rhetoric and the name-calling.
Okay, Brent, thanks a lot for your contribution. Let's ask Rami Khouri. Brent almost has a roadmap for peace of his own. I just want to focus for a second on what he said about the possibility of an interim government in Egypt and wanting Mohamed ElBaradei to be a part of it, because we have heard from ElBaradei and Hezbollah Wafd, one of the secular, if you like, political parties there, saying publicly that if they come to power, that they will honor and respect the peace deal with Israel. That's quite encouraging, is it not?
It is, and I think it reflects the reality that the overwhelming majority of Egyptians want to maintain the peace agreement. They don't want to go back to a state of war with Israel, but they also want justice for the Palestinians. The Arabs have made it clear, all the Arabs, through the Arab peace plan, they're prepared to live with Israel, have normal relations with it. If the Palestinian issue is resolved according to law and international resolutions, and Israel gets its core demands, which is to live in security as a Jewish majority state that it is now, but resolving the refugee issue according to law. So I think there is a great opportunity to do this. I would argue that Brent's point is good, and Meir said the Israelis should take the initiative on this now. They feel cornered, they feel vulnerable, they're worried. Take the initiative, show that you're really serious about making a peace agreement that addresses the core issues of Palestinian refugeehood as well as Israeli security. And the Arabs should reaffirm the 2002 peace plan. Make it more clear. What are we talking about and about these issues? How do we solve these issues? And what is the tremendous future for all of us if you have 350 million Arabs with the Turks and Iranians and Israelis all working together? There's a glorious future if we can do it.
Okay, Rami, sorry to stop you there, but we have run out of time. Rami Khouri, Meir Javedanfar and Gil Hoffman, thank you very much for joining us here on the Riz Khan Show. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. This week we're featuring an interview with Bill and Melinda Gates. And on the next show, what will be the next twist in Haiti's unfolding political drama? With an election winner yet to be decided, how could the return of 2 of the country's most controversial former leaders affect the political process? Make sure to tune in for that. We'll see you next time.